Have you ever wondered what happens when a secret, kept buried for years, finally explodes? What if the perfect wedding, a celebration of new love, became the stage for a life-shattering revelation? A man invites his ex-wife to watch him marry another woman, hoping to flaunt his newfound happiness. He thinks he's closing a chapter, proving he's moved on, but he has no idea that she is about to rewrite his entire life story. She isn't coming to shed a tear for what was lost. She's coming to reveal what he never knew he had. Stay with me for a story of betrayal, secrets, and a surprise guest who changes everything. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't delivered by a normal mail carrier, but by a courier, enclosed in a stiff, cream-colored box tied with a thick gold ribbon. Celine Connolly stared at it from her kitchen island, a cup of herbal tea growing cold in her hands. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons, a relic from a past she had meticulously walled off. For 8 years, she had built a new life from the rubble of her marriage, a quiet, peaceful fortress where she and her son, Leo, were the sole occupants. That box on her counter was a Trojan horse sent to breach her walls. Her hands, steady from years of kneading dough in her small but successful bakery, trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon. Inside, resting on a bed of synthetic silk, was a card made of paper so thick it felt like a sheet of fine wood. The lettering was embossed in gold foil, a swirling, pretentious script that screamed money but whispered nothing of taste. Chloe Sterling and Eric Hayes request the honor of your presence at the celebration of their union. Celine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, a sound that was half sigh, half bitter laugh. Of course, Eric Hayes, the man who had once promised her a lifetime, was now promising it to someone else, and he wanted her there to witness it. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. The details were even more galling. The wedding was to be held at the prestigious Blackwood Manor, a sprawling estate with gardens that were featured in luxury lifestyle magazines. It was the kind of place Eric had always aspired to, a symbol of the wealth and status he valued above all else. He hadn't just moved on, he had upgraded, and he was making sure she knew it. She sank onto a stool, the thick card cold against her fingertips. Memories, unwanted and sharp, pierced the calm of her morning. She remembered Eric, not the corporate titan he had become, but the ambitious young man with fire in his eyes she had fallen for in college. He had a brilliant mind and a charm that could disarm anyone. He had painted a future for them so vivid she could almost touch it. A partnership, a climb to the top, a world of their own making. But his ambition had a dark side. It was a ravenous hunger that consumed everything in its path, including, eventually, their love. The higher he climbed the corporate ladder, the more distant he became. He was a ghost in their beautiful, empty house, his presence marked only by expensive suits left on the valet stand and the lingering scent of his cologne. The final, fatal blow had come during a tense dinner on their 5th anniversary. She had brought up the one topic he always avoided: children. "Eric, we're not getting any younger," she had said, her voice soft but firm. "I want a family. I thought we both did." His face had hardened, the charming mask slipping away to reveal the cold, calculating man beneath. "A family? Celine, look at where we are. I'm on the verge of the biggest deal of my career. A child is a distraction, an anchor. I can't afford that. I thought you understood the plan." "The plan? Your plan, you mean," she had shot back, the hurt sharpening her words. "There's no us in your plan anymore, is there? Just you and your ambition." "I never wanted kids," he had said, his voice flat and final. "I thought you knew that. If that's what you want, you chose the wrong man." Those words had shattered her. He hadn't just rejected the idea of a child. He had rejected the very core of the future she had envisioned with him. The divorce that followed was swift and clinical. He was generous with the settlement, a conscience-clearing payment, but emotionally he was a barren wasteland. He had her sign an NDA, a final insult ensuring she could never speak about the man he truly was behind the polished public image. He had effectively paid to erase her from his history, except for this one, final, cruel performance he was demanding she attend. A small voice pulled her from the past. "Mom, are you okay?" Leo stood in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. At 7 years old, he was the center of her universe, the sun her life orbited. He had a mop of dark brown hair that fell into his eyes and a serious, intelligent gaze that missed nothing. He was a miniature, softer version of the man on the invitation. Looking at him was a constant, bittersweet reminder of what she had lost and everything she had gained. "I'm fine, sweetie," she said, forcing a smile and quickly sliding the invitation back into its box. "Just thinking, how was school?" "It was good. We learned about volcanoes," he said, climbing onto the stool next to her and grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "Did you get a present?" "Something like that," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the golden ribbon. For 8 years, she had protected him from his father's world of cold ambition and transactional relationships. She had told Leo that his father was a man who had to go away a long time ago. A simple, painless story for a young mind. She never lied, but she had curated the truth. She had never wanted Eric's money, never wanted his influence to poison the beautiful, kind boy she was raising. Leo was hers and she was his, and their small world was enough. But now this invitation felt like a threat. Chloe Sterling was a name she knew from society pages. She was 28, the daughter of a tech mogul, and known for her relentless social climbing. Celine had seen pictures of her clinging to Eric's arm at charity galas, her smile as bright and artificial as a camera flash. Chloe was everything Celine wasn't, a woman who would complement Eric's ambition, not challenge it. A perfect corporate wife who wouldn't bother him with messy things like feelings or the desire for a family. Or so Eric thought. Celine spent the rest of the day in a haze, her hands working automatically at the bakery, mixing flour and sugar while her mind churned. Why would he do this? Was it pure cruelty, a power play, or something else? Perhaps it was Chloe's idea, a way for the new bride to mark her territory and gloat over her vanquished predecessor. The thought sent a chill down her spine. That evening, after tucking Leo into bed, she sat in her quiet living room with the invitation in her lap. The gold letters seemed to mock her. "Come watch me have everything I denied you." For years, she had chosen peace. She had chosen to walk away, to build a life where Eric Hayes was nothing but a faded memory. But holding that invitation, a deep, dormant part of her began to stir. It wasn't just anger. It was a fierce, protective instinct. Eric had made his choice. He had chosen a life without a son. He had erased them both. Maybe it was time he was reminded of what and who he had thrown away. The invitation wasn't just a summons. It was an opportunity. An opportunity to stop curating the truth and finally let it be known. She looked at the RSVP card, her decision hardening with every beat of her heart. Celine Connolly +1. Her surprise guest wouldn't be a new man on her arm to make Eric jealous. It would be the living, breathing secret that would unravel his perfectly constructed world. The days following the arrival of the invitation were a torment of indecision for Celine. One moment she was resolved, a cold fire of purpose burning in her chest. The next she was paralyzed by doubt, the what-ifs crashing over her like a relentless tide. Was this the right thing to do? Was it fair to Leo? Was it an act of justice or an act of petty revenge? She confided in her best friend Amelia, a sharp-witted lawyer who had been her rock during the divorce. They sat in Amelia's sleek, minimalist apartment, a stark contrast to the cozy, flower-dusted warmth of Celine's home. "You have to be kidding me," Amelia said, swirling the wine in her glass after Celine laid the invitation on the coffee table. "The nerve of that man. It's not enough that he gutted you and left you to bleed out emotionally. Now he wants you to come and applaud his new life? He's a monster." "He's not a monster, Amy," Celine said quietly. "He's just empty. He thinks this is a display of magnanimity. Look how evolved we are. We can be friends. He has no idea how cruel it is." "So don't go," Amelia said, her voice softening. "Throw it in the fire. Let him have his tacky, soulless wedding. You and Leo are happy. You don't need to reopen that wound." "But it's not just about me anymore," Celine confessed, the words she'd been holding back finally tumbling out. "It's about Leo. He's starting to ask questions, real questions. The other day, a kid at school asked him why he doesn't have a dad. I saw the look on his face, Amy. I can't protect him with vague stories forever." She paused, taking a deep breath. And there's something else. I did some digging. Chloe Sterling's father is a major investor in Eric's new venture capital firm. This marriage isn't just a marriage, it's a merger. And I heard a rumor, a nasty one. Eric had a health scare last year, something that affected his ability to have children in the future. Amelia's eyes widened. You're saying he's sterile? Possibly. And if that's true, then Leo is his only chance at a biological heir. Eric doesn't know that. He's building this empire, this legacy, and for what? To leave it to Chloe's future children from a sperm donor? It doesn't feel right. Leo is his son. He has a right to his heritage, his legacy, whether Eric deserves to know him or not. Amelia was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. So this isn't revenge, she finally said. This is a hostile takeover. Celine flinched. I don't see it like that. I see it as, correcting the record. Eric built his new life on a lie. The lie that a child would ruin him. I want him to see that a child built me. And I want his family, the people who were always kind to me, to know they have a grandson. The memory of Eric's parents, Robert and Margaret Hayes, was a warm spot in the cold landscape of her marriage. They had adored Celine and had been quietly devastated by the divorce. They sent Leo a birthday card every year, addressed only to Celine's son, a subtle acknowledgement that they suspected, or at least hoped. They had respected her silence, but had never fully let her go. They deserved to know the truth. Her decision was made. It wasn't about destroying Eric's wedding day. It was about building Leo's future. The next week was a flurry of quiet preparation. Celine bought a dress, not something flashy or provocative, but a simple, elegant sheath of deep sapphire blue that spoke of confidence and self-possession. It was the color of a calm sea, belying the storm she was about to unleash. The most difficult part was preparing Leo. She couldn't tell him the full truth. It would be too much for his 7-year-old heart to bear. Instead, she framed it carefully. One afternoon, as they were tending to the small herb garden in their backyard, she sat down with him on the grass. Leo, honey, she began, her heart pounding. Do you remember me telling you about the man who was my husband a long time ago? Leo nodded, his attention still on a ladybug crawling up his arm. The one who went away. That's right. Well, I'm going to see him in a few days, and I was thinking, maybe you'd like to come with me. You could meet him. Leo looked up, his brow furrowed. Why? It was the simple, devastating question she had dreaded. Because he's a part of my story, which means he's a small part of your story too. And I think it's time he knew what a wonderful story it is. He seemed to consider this, his expression serious. Is he nice? Celine's throat tightened. He can be. He's very important. And sometimes important people forget what really matters. Maybe we can help remind him. It was a half-truth, but it was the best she could do. He finally agreed, his curiosity piqued. The night before the wedding, Celine couldn't sleep. She sat by Leo's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. His face, so peaceful in sleep, was a perfect blend of hers and Eric's. He had her compassionate eyes and Eric's determined jaw. He was a living testament to a love that had once existed, a love Eric had tried to bury under layers of ambition and wealth. A flashback, vivid and painful, surfaced. She was standing in the bathroom of their old cavernous house, a month after the divorce papers were finalized. In her hand was a positive pregnancy test, 2 pink lines that felt like a death sentence, and a miracle all at once. She had sunk to the floor, her body racked with sobs of terror, of grief, and of a strange, fierce joy. She was alone, but she wasn't. She had a piece of their love left, a piece of him, and she swore in that moment that she would protect this child from the man who would have seen him as a liability. Now, years later, that promise was being put to the test. She was no longer protecting Leo from his father, but claiming his father's world for him. She kissed his forehead, her resolve solidifying like steel. Tomorrow she wouldn't just be Celine Connolly, the baker, the ex-wife. She would be a mother fighting for her son's past, present, and future. And Eric Hayes would finally have to face the truth he had paid so much to avoid. Blackwood Manor was even more opulent than the magazine suggested. A long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees led to a stately Georgian mansion that looked like it had been plucked from the English countryside. Valets in crisp uniforms scurried to open car doors. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits drifted across the manicured lawns, champagne flutes in hand. It was a world of performative perfection, a world designed to intimidate. Celine, however, felt a strange sense of calm as she pulled her modest sedan into the designated guest parking, far from the gleaming luxury cars at the front. She had arranged for Leo to stay with Amelia, who lived just 15 minutes away, until the time was right. She needed to navigate the first part of this event alone. Walking towards the mansion, she felt the familiar weight of being an outsider. But this time, it was different. 8 years ago, she would have felt insecure, out of place. Today, she felt like an observer, a secret agent on a mission. Her simple sapphire dress was a quiet statement in a sea of sequins and ruffles. She had her own power now, a power that didn't come from a husband's bank account, but from the life she had built and the truth she carried. She saw him almost immediately. Eric was standing near the grand entrance, a king in his castle. He looked older, his hair tinged with gray at the temples, but he wore his success like a custom-made suit. Beside him, Chloe was a vision in white, her dress a confection of lace and diamonds. She was radiant, laughing a little too loudly, her hand possessively on Eric's arm. As Celine approached, she saw a flicker of something in Eric's eyes, surprise quickly masked by a practiced, charming smile. "Celine, you came. I'm so glad." He leaned in for an awkward, one-armed hug, his body stiff. "You invited me," she replied, her voice even. "Congratulations, Eric. She's lovely." Chloe's smile was wide but didn't reach her eyes. They scanned Celine from head to toe in a fraction of a second, cataloging her dress, her hair, her lack of expensive jewelry. "Celine, it's just so good of you to be here. It means the world to us that we can all be so mature about this." The word mature was laced with condescension. "Of course," Celine said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It's an important day." Before the stilted conversation could continue, a warm voice cut in. "Celine, dear, is that really you?" Margaret Hayes, Eric's mother, was hurrying towards them, her husband Robert a few steps behind. Margaret's face was a mixture of shock and genuine delight. She ignored Chloe completely and pulled Celine into a warm, heartfelt embrace. "Oh, my dear, you look wonderful. Absolutely wonderful." Robert Hayes, a man of few words but deep integrity, gave her a gentle smile and a firm handshake. "It's good to see you, Celine." His eyes held a question, a deep-seated sadness he had never been able to hide. "It's so good to see you both," Celine said, her voice thick with genuine emotion. These were the people she had truly missed, the family she had lost in the divorce. Chloe's smile tightened into a thin line. She looped her arm more firmly through Eric's. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We should go and greet the other guests." Margaret pulled back from Celine but kept a hand on her arm, a silent act of allegiance. "You go ahead, dear. Robert and I want to catch up with Celine." Eric looked caught, a man stranded between his past and his present. He gave a weak smile and allowed Chloe to lead him away, though he glanced back over his shoulder, a flicker of an unreadable emotion on his face. "I can't believe he invited you," Margaret whispered once they were out of earshot. "And I certainly can't believe you came." "It felt like the right time," Celine said cryptically. "We miss you, you know," Robert said, his gaze direct. "This place, it's all very grand, but it feels hollow." Their kindness was a balm and a spur. It reaffirmed her decision. They deserved to know. They deserved a grandson. "I have so much to tell you both," she said, her voice low. "But not here. Not yet. Can you trust me?" Margaret searched her face, her maternal intuition sensing the gravity beneath Celine's calm exterior. She squeezed her arm. "Always, dear. Always." As the Hayes moved on to greet other relatives, Celine found a quiet spot on the veranda, overlooking a rose garden. She watched the proceedings from a distance. She saw Eric schmoozing with Chloe's father, the deal behind the marriage being sealed with champagne and polite laughter. She saw Chloe flitting from group to group, the perfect hostess, her every move calculated for maximum effect. They were a perfect couple on the surface, a powerhouse of wealth and ambition. But Celine knew what lay beneath. She knew the emptiness in Eric, the insatiable need for more that would never be filled. And she suspected the hollowness in Chloe, a woman who had acquired a husband like one might acquire a rare piece of art. She felt a hand on her arm and turned startled. It was Eric. He had managed to slip away from the crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now that they were alone. "I'm fine," she said. "It's a beautiful wedding." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Celine, about the invitation. I don't know if it was the right thing to do." Chloe insisted. "She wanted to, I don't know, clear the air." "You mean she wanted to show me what she'd won?" Celine replied, her voice devoid of accusation, stating it simply as a fact. Eric had the decency to look uncomfortable. "It's not like that. I am happy, Celine. Chloe, she understands my world. She doesn't fight me on it." The old wound twinged. "She doesn't ask you for things you can't give, like a heart, like a child." "I'm glad you're happy, Eric," she said, and to her own surprise, she meant it in a way. His happiness, this hollow, gilded thing, was the perfect backdrop for the truth she was about to reveal. It would make the impact that much more spectacular. A bell chimed, signaling the guests to take their seats for the ceremony. "I should go," he said, already backing away, eager to return to his role. "We'll talk later." "Yes," Celine said softly as he walked away. "We will." She took out her phone and sent a short text to Amelia. "Stage 1 complete. Stand by." She then found her seat, a single chair in the back row, a solitary island of truth in an ocean of beautiful lies. The orchestra began to play. The show was about to begin. The ceremony took place in a meticulously manicured garden, under a large white gazebo dripping with roses and wisteria. Hundreds of guests sat in perfect rows of white chairs, fanning themselves with programs that bore Eric and Chloe's intertwined initials in gold. It was a scene of idyllic romance, flawlessly staged and utterly devoid of genuine warmth. From her seat in the back, Celine had a clear view of Eric at the altar. He looked composed, confident, every inch the master of the universe. Yet she could see the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he kept adjusting his cufflinks. He was playing a part, just as he always had. Then came the bride. Chloe glided down the aisle on her father's arm, her face a mask of beatific joy for the cameras that flashed from the sidelines. The crowd sighed in admiration. The dress was a spectacle, a cloud of designer tulle and intricate beadwork that probably cost more than Celine's car. It was a dress meant to be seen, to be photographed, to be envied. As Chloe reached the altar, she shot a quick, triumphant glance over her shoulder, her eyes finding Celine's for a brief second. It was a look that said, "He's mine now. You lose." Celine simply held her gaze, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention back to the ceremony. The officiant began to speak, his voice droning on about love, partnership, and eternity. Celine felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie whose ending she already knew. She remembered her own wedding to Eric. It had been a small, simple affair at a historic courthouse, followed by a raucous reception at their favorite Italian restaurant. It had been real, filled with laughter and hope, before his ambition had calcified his heart. Then came the vows. Chloe spoke first, her voice ringing with practiced emotion. "My dearest Eric," she began, "from the moment I met you, I knew my life had changed forever. You are my rock, my partner, my everything. You inspire me to be better, to reach higher. I promise to stand by you as you build your empire, to be the wife you deserve, to create a perfect life with you, for all the world to see." Celine almost scoffed. "To be the wife you deserve, to build your empire, for all the world to see." It was a business proposal disguised as a vow of love. Eric's vows were shorter, more direct. "Chloe," he said, his voice steady, "you came into my life and understood me. You accept my drive, my focus. You don't ask me to be anything other than what I am. I promise to provide for you, to protect you, and to build a future with you that will be the envy of everyone we know." There it was. the envy of everyone we know. That was the foundation of their marriage, not love, not partnership, but envy. He was marrying a reflection of his own success. He was marrying his brand. As they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, the crowd erupted in polite applause. Celine clapped along with them, a slow, deliberate motion. The performance was over. Now the real drama could begin. During the cocktail hour that followed, Celine kept to herself, nursing a glass of sparkling water. She didn't want to engage in small talk. She was a silent observer, gathering her strength. But Chloe, it seemed, had other plans. Spotting Celine alone by the fountain, the bride made a beeline for her new husband trailing in her wake like a prized accessory. "Celine, there you are," Chloe chirped, her smile dazzlingly false. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "It was a beautiful ceremony," Celine replied politely. "Wasn't it? Everything has to be just perfect, you know," Chloe said, smoothing a hand down her impossibly expensive dress. "Eric deserves perfection. I'm so glad we can put the past behind us. No awkwardness, right?" "None at all," Celine said, her voice placid. Chloe leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was still loud enough for Eric and those nearby to hear. "I have to admit, I was surprised when you RSVP'd yes. Most women in your position would be. Well, you know, it takes a certain kind of strength to watch the love of your life marry someone else." The venom was thinly veiled. It was a direct shot designed to humiliate her. Eric shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around, hoping no one was paying too much attention. But Celine didn't rise to the bait. She simply smiled, a small, enigmatic smile that seemed to unnerve Chloe more than any angry retort would have. "Oh, I don't think of Eric as the love of my life anymore," she said, her voice clear and calm. "He was a chapter, a very important one, it turns out. But my life has a much more compelling story now." She looked directly at Eric as she spoke. "You see, Chloe, some people build their lives around acquiring things. Wealth, status, the perfect partner. Others build their lives around creating something. Something real. Something that lasts." Chloe's smile faltered. She hadn't expected this quiet, unshakable confidence. She had expected tears or bitterness, or at the very least, a resentful silence. She had no idea how to respond. "Well," she finally sputtered, "I'm glad you're happy with your creations." She gestured vaguely, as if picturing Celine's small-town bakery. The insult was clear. "Oh, I am," Celine said, her smile widening slightly. "More than you could ever possibly know." With a final, polite nod, she turned and walked away, leaving the bride and groom standing in a stunned, awkward silence. The first crack in their perfect facade had appeared. Chloe's triumphant smirk had been replaced by a flash of angry confusion. She had tried to land a knockout punch and had somehow ended up staggering. Celine found a quiet bench away from the crowd and took out her phone. Her hands were perfectly steady. She sent another text to Amelia. "Phase 2. Bring him in 30 minutes. North entrance." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor. The golden hour was approaching. It was almost time for the main event. The reception was held in a grand ballroom that glittered with crystal chandeliers and an obscene amount of floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in the corner as guests found their tables, each one named after a different luxury brand. Celine found her name card at the Bentley table, tucked away in the back, a clear social demotion. She was seated with some distant cousins of Eric's and a few of his junior colleagues who looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She didn't mind. The back of the room provided the perfect vantage point. Dinner was a multi-course affair, each dish more elaborate and less satisfying than the last. Celine ate little, her stomach a knot of anticipation. She watched Eric and Chloe at the head table on their raised dais, holding court. They were the picture of happiness, laughing, kissing for the cameras, accepting congratulations. It was a flawless performance. Finally, the clinking of a glass signaled the beginning of the speeches. The best man, Eric's college roommate and business partner Kevin, stood up. He was a man in Eric's mold, slick, confident, and with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "To Eric and Chloe," he began, "I've known Eric for 20 years. I've seen him close million-dollar deals. I've seen him build a company from the ground up, but I have never seen him as happy as he is today. Chloe, you've done the impossible. You've finally managed to lock down the city's most eligible bachelor." The crowd laughed. Kevin continued with a few more tired jokes about marriage being the end of freedom and a thinly veiled story about a wild trip to Vegas that was meant to sound roguish, but just sounded pathetic. He concluded, "Eric has always been a man who knows what he wants and goes after it. In Chloe, he's found the perfect partner to build his dynasty with. To the future Mr. and Mrs. Hayes and their future dynasty." Celine listened, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Dynasty. The word hung in the air. A dynasty required an heir. Next, Chloe's father, a formidable man with a face like a clenched fist, gave a speech that sounded more like a business report, praising Eric's Q3 projections and the synergistic potential of their family's union. It was clear to anyone listening that this was a transaction, not a marriage. Then Robert Hayes, Eric's father, was called to the microphone. He walked slowly to the stage, his expression somber. The room quieted. Robert was a man respected for his quiet dignity, a stark contrast to his son's flashy ambition. He adjusted the microphone, his eyes scanning the room. He nodded politely to Chloe, but then his gaze found Celine in the back of the room, and it lingered for a moment, filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. "Good evening, everyone," Robert began, his voice raspy with emotion. "It is a father's duty to wish his son happiness on his wedding day. Eric, I wish you contentment. I hope you find what you're looking for." The choice of the word contentment instead of happiness was subtle but sharp. "When Eric was a boy," Robert continued, his voice growing stronger, "he wasn't interested in building empires. He was interested in building forts in the backyard. He didn't care about stock prices. He cared about the stray dog he'd found and nursed back to health. He had a good heart. Life and ambition can sometimes make us forget the things that truly build a legacy. A legacy isn't about the buildings you own or the money you accumulate. It's about the lives you touch, the family you create, the love you leave behind." A tense silence fell over the room. Every word was a gentle but deliberate critique of the life Eric had chosen. Chloe's smile was frozen on her face, her knuckles white as she gripped her champagne glass. Eric stared at his father, a muscle twitching in his jaw. This was not the celebratory, backslapping speech he had expected. "I have made my own share of mistakes," Robert concluded, his gaze sweeping over Eric and Chloe, but again coming to rest on Celine. "My greatest hope is that we all learn from them before it's too late. To Eric and Chloe, may your life together be what you desire." He raised his glass, took a perfunctory sip, and returned to his seat without another word. The applause was scattered and uncertain. Robert's speech had punctured the bubble of synthetic joy, introducing a note of profound, uncomfortable truth. He hadn't just given a toast, he had delivered a warning. Celine felt a surge of adrenaline. Robert had, perhaps unknowingly, set the perfect stage for her. He had spoken of legacy, of family, of the things that truly matter. Now it was time to show them what a real legacy looked like. She glanced at her phone. A new text from Amelia. "Here, North Entrance." The timing was perfect. The band began to play a slow song, and Eric led Chloe to the floor for their first dance. They swayed together, a perfect couple in the spotlight, but the magic was gone. Robert's words echoed in the silence between the musical notes. As the song ended, Eric, ever the magnanimous host, took the microphone himself. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his smile back in place, though it seemed a bit strained. "It means the world to us." He looked around the room, his eyes sweeping over his guests, his empire. And then he made his fatal mistake. His gaze landed on Celine. "I'd especially like to thank Celine for being here," he said, his voice dripping with condescension he probably thought was charm. "It shows a real maturity and a lack of hard feelings. I'm glad you could come and see what true happiness looks like. I sincerely hope you find what you're looking for one day, Celine." The room was silent. It was a public dismissal, a final pat on the head to the forgotten ex-wife. He was closing the book, and she was merely a footnote in his grand story. Celine stood up, Her movement was quiet, but in the silent ballroom, it was as loud as a gunshot. Every eye turned to her. She began to walk toward the stage, her steps measured and deliberate. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Chloe's face clouded with fury. Eric looked utterly bewildered. This was it. The moment had arrived. Celine reached the stage, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her expression was one of serene composure. She held out her hand for the microphone. Eric, caught completely off guard, hesitated for a second before handing it over, a confused and irritated frown creasing his brow. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. "You wish me well," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to return the favor." She turned to face the stunned crowd, the microphone cool and heavy in her hand. The spotlight that had been on the happy couple now found her, isolating her in a pool of brilliant white light. The ballroom was so quiet she could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous room. "My name is Celine Connolly. As Eric so graciously pointed out, I am his ex-wife." A nervous titter went through the guests. Chloe looked as if she was about to physically drag Celine off the stage. "Eric, you and I have a complicated history," Celine continued, turning her head to look directly at him. His face was a mask of disbelief and growing anger. "We built a life together, and then we tore it down. Or rather, you tore it down, and you gave me a very specific reason. You said you didn't want a family. You said a child was an anchor you couldn't afford, a distraction from the dynasty you were so determined to build." She let the words hang in the air, each one a stone dropping into a silent pond. She saw his parents, Robert and Margaret, lean forward in their seats, their faces etched with intense concentration. "You spoke of happiness tonight, Eric," Celine said, her voice softening but losing none of its power. "And you wished it for me. You said you hoped I would find what I was looking for. But the funny thing is, I wasn't looking for anything, because right after you left, I was given the greatest gift of my life, a gift you told me you never wanted." She paused, taking a deep breath, and turned her gaze toward the north entrance of the ballroom. As if on cue, the doors opened. Amelia stepped inside, holding the hand of a small boy with a mop of dark brown hair and a serious, intelligent face. He was dressed in a smart little suit, and he looked around the glittering room with wide, curious eyes. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The boy was the spitting image of Eric Hayes. It was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same shape of the eyes, the same determined set of his mouth. It was like looking at a photograph of Eric as a child. Celine smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Eric, you told me a child would be an anchor, but you were wrong. He became my wings. He taught me what true success is. It's not about envy or empires. It's about bedtime stories and scraped knees. It's about unconditional love." She beckoned for her son to come forward. Leo, holding tight to Amelia's hand, walked hesitantly toward the stage. The crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. Eric was frozen, his face drained of all color. He stared at the boy, his mouth slightly agape, his mind visibly struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. Beside him, Chloe's face had contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and horror. Her perfect day, her perfect marriage, was shattering before her very eyes. Celine knelt down as Leo reached the edge of the stage. She spoke into the microphone, but her eyes were on her son. "It's okay, sweetie," she said softly. Then she stood up, her arm around Leo's small shoulders, and faced her ex-husband. "Eric Hayes," she announced, her voice ringing with the force of an 8-year-old truth. "You wanted a dynasty. You wanted a legacy. Well, here he is. I didn't come alone tonight. I brought a surprise guest." She placed a gentle hand on her son's head. "Everyone, I would like you to meet Leo Connolly, your son." The last two words landed with the force of a physical blow. Pandemonium erupted. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly. The entire ballroom was on its feet, a cacophony of shocked whispers, gasps, and murmurs. Robert and Margaret Hayes were already moving, pushing past guests, their faces streaked with tears of disbelief and sudden, overwhelming joy. Eric didn't move. He couldn't. He just stared at the boy, his son, a living, breathing ghost from a past he thought he had successfully buried. The empire he had built suddenly felt like a pile of dust. The woman standing next to him, his bride of less than an hour, was screaming his name, but he couldn't hear her. All he could see was the boy's face, a perfect, miniature reflection of his own, looking up at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Celine looked at the chaos she had unleashed, at the perfect facade now lying in ruins. She felt no triumph, no glee, just a profound, aching sense of release. The secret was out. The record had been corrected. She leaned down and whispered in her son's ear, "It's time to go home." The chaos in the ballroom was instantaneous and absolute. Chloe's carefully constructed dream imploded. Her shriek of "Eric" finally broke through his shock. It was a sound of pure rage, not hurt. "What is this? Eric, what is she talking about?" She screamed, her voice shrill, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his arm. "This is our wedding day. Get them out of here. Security." But no one was listening to the bride. All eyes were on the tableau at the front of the room, the stunned groom, the triumphant mother, and the boy who had changed everything. Robert and Margaret were the first to reach the stage. Margaret fell to her knees in front of Leo, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God," she wept, her voice choked with emotion. "Oh my God, he looks just like you, Robert." Robert stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his gaze fixed on his grandson. The stern, disappointed man who had given the toast was gone, replaced by a grandfather seeing his legacy for the first time. He looked from Leo to Eric and then to Celine, his eyes filled with a universe of questions and a dawning, profound gratitude. Eric finally seemed to break from his paralysis. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand outstretched, his lips forming a word that made no sound. He looked at Leo, then at Celine, his expression a frantic, desperate plea for an explanation, for a denial, for anything other than this reality. "Celine, is this?" he stammered, unable to finish the sentence. "He's 7 years old, Eric," she said, her voice soft but firm, for his ears only. "His birthday is October 12th. Do the math." The color drained completely from his face as his mind worked backward. October 12th. 9 months after their last, desperate attempt to save their marriage. He swayed on his feet. Chloe saw her future, the merger, the status, the inheritance, evaporating. "This is a trick," she screeched, her voice cracking. "She's a liar. She's after your money, Eric. She's a pathetic, washed-up nobody trying to ruin our lives." Her ugly, panicked words cut through the noise, but instead of garnering sympathy, they exposed the raw, transactional nature of her heart. She wasn't a wife whose husband had been dealt a shocking blow. She was a CEO whose business deal was collapsing. Celine ignored her completely. Her mission was accomplished. She had delivered the truth. How they dealt with it was no longer her concern. She gave a small, reassuring squeeze to Leo's shoulder. "Come on, sweetie, let's go." With Amelia running interference, she guided Leo away from the stage. The crowd parted for them, a sea of astonished faces. No one tried to stop her. She was a force of nature that had just swept through their gilded world, and they could only stare in her wake. As she reached the doors, she glanced back one last time. She saw Eric, caught between his weeping parents who were cooing over their newfound grandson, and his hysterical bride, who was pulling at his sleeve, her face a mask of rage. He was a man ripped in two, his past and future colliding in a devastating public explosion. For the first time in years, Eric Hayes was not in control. The drive home was quiet. Leo, exhausted by the sensory overload, fell asleep in the back seat, his small face peaceful. Celine drove through the night, the glittering lights of the city a blur through her own tear-filled eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or regret, but of a final, complete catharsis. The weight she had carried alone for 8 years had been lifted. The following days were a media firestorm. Billionaire's wedding bombshell. Secret son revealed by ex-wife, screamed the headlines. Paparazzi camped outside her bakery. Her phone rang endlessly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and television producers. She ignored them all, putting up a "Closed for Family Matters" sign on her shop door and retreating into the sanctuary of her home with Leo. Eric's lawyers reached out, of course. The first letters were threatening, full of legal jargon about defamation and parental fraud. Amelia laughed at them and sent back a simple two-word reply: paternity test. After that, the tone changed. The letters became pleading. Eric wanted to see his son. He wanted to talk. Celine took her time. She spent a week just being with Leo, answering his questions as honestly as she could. She told him that the man he met was his father, and that he was very surprised because he never knew about him. She explained that things were complicated, but that he was loved by so many people. Finally, a week after the wedding, she agreed to a meeting. Not with Eric, but with Robert and Margaret. They met at a neutral location, a quiet park. The moment they saw Leo, they were overcome. They didn't come with lawyers or demands. They came with a photo album of Eric as a boy and a box of toys. They spent 2 hours simply getting to know their grandson, their joy and love for him pure and overwhelming. They promised Celine they would support her in any way she needed, that they would ensure Leo was protected and knew his family. Eric came a few days later, alone. He met Celine at her bakery after hours. He looked like a ghost. He had lost weight, and the confident swagger was gone, replaced by a haunted, broken humility. Chloe had left him. Her father had pulled his funding from Eric's firm. His perfect world had crumbled to dust. "Why, Celine?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me all these years? Why?" "You told me you never wanted children," she said, her voice even, without bitterness. "You made it very clear what you valued, and it wasn't family. I wanted my son to be raised knowing he was wanted, every single day. I wanted him to be raised by me, not by a series of nannies while you were off building your empire. I didn't do it to punish you, Eric. I did it to protect him." He flinched, the truth of her words hitting him hard. I was a fool," he whispered, finally admitting the truth. "I threw away the only thing that ever mattered for things that don't. Can I meet him? As his father?" Celine looked at the broken man before her. "That's not up to me anymore, Eric," she said. "That's up to Leo. You can't just be his father. You have to earn the right to be his dad. It will take time, and it starts now." The future was unwritten. It would be a long, difficult road of therapy, legal arrangements, and slow, painful trust building. But as Celine stood in her quiet bakery, the scent of fresh bread in the air, she felt a profound sense of peace. She hadn't sought revenge. She had sought justice for her son. She hadn't destroyed a life. She had shattered a series of lies to reveal a fundamental truth. Her life was no longer a secret, and for the first time, she felt completely, unshakably free. And that's the story of how one woman's courage to reveal a long-held secret completely upended a world built on lies. Celine didn't seek revenge. She sought truth for her son, and in doing so, she reclaimed her own power. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or status, but in love, integrity, and the bonds of family. What do you think Eric will do next? Can he ever truly become the father Leo deserves? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of justice and vindication. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.